And that is what was created there. It is no different than a banana cartel or a sugar cartel or an oil cartel. It happens to be a banking cartel. And the brilliance of these guys is that they knew that it's always difficult to keep members of the cartel in line. Just think about it for a minute. Supposing you're running an oil cartel and you're crossing national boundaries, and you've got people in Mexico and people in the Middle East, and you've got countries everywhere in the world. They all got their oil wells, and you say, let's get together, guys, so we can all fix the price or limit the supply to force the price up, whatever your decision is. And everybody agrees. Great. Now, a year down the line, one of the members of the cartel, let's say Mexico, says, you know, we've got a lot of oil here. We're not pumping as much as we could. I think if we lowered our price a little bit and broke the cartel agreement, we could make more money than even we are now making it through the cartel. And they may decide to break the cartel agreement. Well, what are the other cartel members going to do about it? Nothing they can do about it. Well, yes, they could hire some jackals, and they could, you know, do that sort of thing. They could get involved in assassination attempts and that kind of thing, which happens. But basically, there's nothing they can do about it legally unless they bring government into it. Now, if you bring government into your cartel agreement, and you take the cartel agreement and make it law, now the government is your enforcer. First time I ran into that years ago, I saw the same thing happen in the Midwest in the dairy cartel. They call it the Dairy Association. The dairy producers in the Midwest, I've forgotten the year on this, but I think it was early 1960s, were concerned because some of the dairies were selling milk too cheaply. They were undercutting the market. And the big producers said, no, we don't like this. How are we going to keep these guys from undercutting us? And so they got the politicians into the picture. And they began to promote laws in all the various states called fair trade laws. Doesn't that sound nice? The object was to fix the price of milk, to make it illegal to charge any price for milk except what was decided by the group. That's a cartel agreement. You couldn't raise or lower your price. It was all fixed. And they said, well, we have to do this because we don't want people charging too much for milk. You know, babies need milk. And we don't want people having malnutrition because they can't get milk. And so this is a humanitarian effort. They always couch their decisions in humanitarian purposes. And so they got all of the dum-dums to pass these so-called fair trade laws, which in the net effect was to raise the price of milk throughout the Midwest. And those undercutting the price were no longer able to do it legally. This is exactly what happens with all cartels, and you've noticed all of them tend to want to go into partnership with government for exactly that reason. And so the brilliance of this group on Jekyll Island is that they took their cartel agreement and they took it to Washington. And they convinced these eggheads in Washington to take an eraser and erase the top of the page which said cartel agreement. And then they typed in the words Federal Reserve Act. And they passed it into law. And now, all the banks, new and old, must obey. You and I must obey. Nobody can escape the cartel agreement or we go to prison. Now you understand, right with that statement, one of the most fundamental facts of the Federal Reserve System. And the reason it appears to be a government agency is because it has the force of law behind it. And if you violate its terms, you can go to prison. And so everybody says, well, nobody can put you in prison except the government, right? So it must be government. When in fact it's a private cartel, ladies and gentlemen, which has simply gotten the Congress of the United States to put its seal of approval on it and to pass the cartel agreement into law. Now you understand the Federal Reserve System far better than any graduate from Harvard, because they do not teach this at Harvard at all. So we learn that by studying what happened on Jekyll Island. And now, well, we'll come to that in a minute, and you can see what's happening in Washington today, and all of a sudden it makes more sense, because we realize we're dealing with a cartel, and what is the purpose of the cartel? It's not to protect the employment rate in the country. The purpose of all cartels is the same, and that's to further the objective of the members of the cartel, period. If Greenspan or Bernanke were to come before some congressional hearing and they were to ask him, well, Mr. Bernanke, why did you raise interest rates this week? It wouldn't go over too well if he said, well, we figured we could get away with it. That wouldn't go over too good. No, he said, well, we're trying to cool inflation because we want to stimulate the economy. We don't want the economy to go out of whack. We did it for you folks, in other words. We're good citizens, and that's why we did it. So you have to be aware of the trickery and the sophistry of their explanations. And it's much easier if you always remember that the chairman of the Federal Reserve System is not the key man. He's an employee. He gets a paycheck, and he takes orders, and his bosses are the heads of the largest banks in New York. When Bernanke speaks, he speaks for the banks, period. And then once you understand that, then it all becomes a lot simpler to unwrap. All right. The last thing I want to do is talk about the Mandrake mechanism, because this is something that if you don't know about it, you need to know about it. I call it the Mandrake mechanism because it's named after that comic book character of the 1940s that I used to read all the time, Mandrake the Magician. He was a guy that had this big black cape, and he could wave the cape, and all kinds of things would materialize out of nothing in his cape. That boom, would be there. And then he could wave it over here and it would all disappear. So he could bring things into existence and out of existence magically. And I thought, this is how they do it at the Federal Reserve System. This is how they create money. And we're talking now about how money is created in the United States and now throughout most of the world. The Mandrake mechanism. It starts with Congress. Remember, this is a partnership now. We have Congress involved, we have the politicians involved, and the bankers involved, each for their mutual benefit. So let's take a brief look at what is the benefit to each of these groups. And we'll start with the politician side, the Congress. The politicians need more money, always, than they're willing to take in taxes. Spending money gets them elected, but taxing their taxpayers and their voters gets them unelected. And so the trick for most politicians has always been, how do you provide benefits without increasing taxes? And the answer is very simple if you're a politician. You just borrow it. It's just sort of like with an individual breadwinner having to make the same decision. If you want to spend more than you earn, how do you do it? Well, you can, if you want to. You can borrow it and live pretty high for a little while. And then, of course, the day of reckoning arrives, and then you lose a lot, maybe everything. But with Congress, the day of reckoning doesn't really arrive. Because these guys know, because they have the power of government behind them, they never have to repay that loan. It's not a genuine loan at all. It has the appearance of a loan. They promise to pay you back, but as we'll see in a moment, they have no intention of ever paying back these loans. Not one of those guys ever thought about paying back a loan. Here's how it works. They need another $1 million today for some welfare program or some vote-buying scheme, some medical program that they're working on. They need lots of money. And so they borrow money from the private sector. And they say, well, we'll borrow it for 1 year. And we'll pay it back a year from now, plus interest. So far, so good. But a year from now arrives. Now these guys in Congress still don't have enough money to pay their current bills, much less pay back the old loans they made a year ago, plus interest. So how do they handle that? Well, it's easy. They just borrow some more, this time enough to cover the old loan, plus interest, plus to cover the new spending projects that are underfunded. And so the phenomenon we see of the national debt going up each year is well known to everybody. These guys, as I say, have no intention of ever paying that back. They just keep borrowing more and more and more.